Good morning. I'm recording the Shir for Masechtas Megillah and Haggada Shel Pesach for Tuesday morning. We are up to Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis, and we're in the middle of a topic. We're up to the word is Meisvei, and it's about halfway down the wide lines. I have it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 lines after they get wide. It's about halfway down the wide lines. Meisvei Chaldias Beparsha Asmuchala. Now, in order to understand the next piece of Gemara, it's not hard, but you have to know your Chumash a little bit. So first, let's get into the topic. We're smack in the middle of a topic. The topic was that the Mishnah taught us that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, that Shabbat is Parsha Shkolim. It also taught us that if Rosh Chodesh Adar came out during the week, the Shabbat before would be Parshat Shkolim. The question was, what do you read on Parsha Shkolim? So Rav said, you read a piece of Chumash from Parshas Pinchas, which had to do with the Korban Tamid. Why would you read a Parsha about the Korban Tamid for Parshas Shkolim? Shkolim means shekels, giving money. Reb Tavi explained because you need the Shkolim in order to buy the Korban Tamid. So therefore it's appropriate to read about the Korban Tamid when the Parsha is Shkolim, because Shkolim buys Tamid. On the other hand, Shmuel said you should read Parshas Kitisa, because Kitisa actually talks about Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu to collect Shkolim. So that's our dispute. Rav says for Shkolim you read the Parsha of Tamid, and Shmuel says for the Parsha of Shkolim you read Kitisa. In order to understand the next piece of Gemara, it's important to know that the Parsha before Kitisa is Tetzaveh, and the Parsha after Kitisa is Vayakel. Again, Tetzaveh comes before Kitisa, and Vayakel comes after. So let's try. Meitivei, the Gemara responds with a question. Chal liot beparsha smuchala. What if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on the Parshas HaShavua, which is the Parsha next to Shkolim? Bein milfanel, bein milachrel. Let's say the Parshas HaShavua is either the Parsha before the Parsha of Shkolim, or the Parshas HaShavua happens to be the Parsha after Shkolim. So what do? It's no problem. Koren ota v'koflen ota. For instance, if the Parsha HaShavua is the Shabbat before Shkolim, so you'll read it. So you'll read the. Let's say if it comes out Parshas Tetzaveh, so you'll read Tetzaveh and you'll read Shkolim because it's Shkolim, and the following week you'll read Kitisa for itself because Kitisa comes after Tetzaveh. Again, if the Shabbat Parsha Shkolim will come out in Parshas Tetzaveh, so you'll read Tetzaveh because that's Parshas HaShavua. You'll read the beginning of Kitisa because that happens to be Shkolim, and then the next week when the Parshat HaShavua is Kitisa, you read it a second time, or vice versa. Let's say you read Kitisa because that was Parshat HaShavua. The following week when it was Vayakel happened to be Shkolim, so you'll read Vayakel and you'll read Kitisa for the second time because now you're reading it for Shkolim. So Korin Ota v'Koflin Ota. You'll read it either once for Parshas HaShavua, you'll read Tetzaveh and Kitisa for Shkolim, and the following week when the Parshas HaShavua is Kitisa, you'll finally do Kitisa. Or when the Shkolim is in Parshas Vayakel, so the previous week you read Kitisa for Kitisa, and the following week you'll read Vayakel and you'll read Kitisa for Shkolim. With Bishlama, this all makes sense. This all is well understood. Lamanda Omar Kitisa. That's if we say Shkolim is Kitisa. Hainu de Misrami Be'ahu Zimna. That's why around before Purim time is usually when those parashiyas happen to be in our calendar. There's Tetzaveh, Kitisa, Vayakel is around the time of the year when we do Shkolim. El Lamanda Omar, but according to Rav, who says that Shkolim is Tzaves Karbani, is Parshas Atamid, Mimis Rami Ahu Zimna, Parshas Pinchas usually comes out in the middle of the summer. So how can it be that Parshas HaShavua would have been around what we read for Shkolim, if what we read for Shkolim is Pinchas, and Parshas Shkolim is usually around Purim time? The Gemara says, "Ain't it's possible." See, L'bnei Marava, people in Israel, the maski l'daraisa betlas shanin. The people in Israel used to only do a circuit of the Torah from Bereshis until the end every 3 years. So if it's every 3 years, it is possible, like in the second year, that Pinchas will have come out, or maybe the end of the third year, Pinchas could have come out around Purim time. But again, according to our schedule, it's only possible that Kitisa can come out around Purim time. But in Israel, where they did the Torah every 3 years, it was possible that Pinchas might come out around Purim time. The Gemara comes now to a final conclusion. Tanya Kavase de Shmuel, we learned a Braita that corresponds to Shmuel, that if Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechali is b'Shabbat, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, Korin Kitisa, so the Parsha Shkolim is Kitisa, so that's the end of that. It's Kitisa, and it's not the Parsha Zatamid. Umaftirin, the Haftorah Navi, is B'Yehoyada HaKohen, the Parsha of Yehoyada HaKohen, where he collected Shkolim. Now we start a slightly different topic, but slightly different. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechali is b'Shabbat. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, so we have 3 issues. First of all, it's Shabbat, so we have Parshas HaShavua. It's Rosh Chodesh, so for Rosh Chodesh we read from Pinchas, but it's also Parshas Shkolim, and we've decided that Shkolim was Kitisa. So you have 3 things to read. So Motzi and Shalosh Teiros, you take out from the Aron Kodesh 3 Sifrei Torah, the Koren Behan, and we read Echad, in the first Sefer Torah, Ben Yana Shal Yom, we read Parshas HaShavua. The Echad, in the next Sefer Torah, you read B'Shal Rosh Chodesh, you read V'Yom HaShabbat and Rosh Chachechem, and the Echad, in the third Sefer Torah, we read the Kitisa. You read Kitisa, which is what we read for Shkolim. And in today's times, it can happen, and we would have 6 aliyot in the Parshas HaShavua. The 7th aliyah we would do in Pinchas, in the second Sefer Torah, and the Maftir would be read from Kitisa, which is Shkolim. Very similar, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Rosh Chodesh Tevet, Shechali is b'Shabbat. If Rosh Chodesh Tevet falls on Shabbat. Now you know that Chanukah starts on the 25th of Kislev. Chanukah is 8 days. So it's inevitable that Rosh Chodesh Tevet will fall in the middle of Chanukah. But sometimes it can even happen that that day of Rosh Chodesh Tevet will actually be on Shabbat. So once again, you have 3 things to read. You have to read Parshas HaShavua because it's Shabbat. You have to read Parshas Pinchas because it's Rosh Chodesh. And we are also reading a passage from Naso because it's Chanukah. So once again, Mevian Shalosh Torah, you take out 3 Sifrei Torah, and B'Korin B'Han, and you read Echad Ben Yana Shal Yom. In one Torah, you read Parshas HaShavua, that's 6 aliyot. Echad, the 7th aliyah, you'll read in the second Torah, B'Der Rosh Chodesh, you'll read Parshas Pinchas, you'll read V'Yom HaShabbat and Rosh Chachechem, and Ve'echad, and then the Maftir will be B'Chanukah. You'll read Parshas Naso, Chanukah. Now, basically, Rabbi Yitzchak said the same halacha twice. Once he talked about if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, so it's Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Shkolim. And the other case was Rosh Chodesh Tevet fell on Shabbat. So it was Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Chanukah. And in each case, he said you need 3 Sifrei Torah. So it's Richa. You needed him to say this halacha twice, in 2 different instances. Because the Itmer Baha, if he only would have talked about Rosh Chodesh Tevet falling on Shabbat, I would say Baha in that case, Kamer Rabbi Yitzchak said that you need 3 Sifrei Torah. Again, 1 for Parshat HaShavua, 1 for Rosh Chodesh, and 1 for Chanukah. Aval, but, perhaps Bahach, perhaps in the case of Rosh Chodesh Adar falling on Shabbat, perhaps, Karav Svirale, Maybe Rabbi Yitzchak held like Rav. You remember we just discussed for over a day that Rav said Amar Parsha Shkolim is as Karbani Lachmi. Rav said that Shkolim was the Parshas Hatamid from Pinchas. If that's true, then what a coincidence that the same thing that you read for Shkolim, you also read for Rosh Chodesh. Both are Parshas Pinchas. So then in B'shtei Torot Sagi, then 2 Torot would be enough, one for Parshas HaShavua, and the second Torah, which is in Pinchas, you can both read for Rosh Chodesh and for Shkolim. Ka Mash Malan, so Rabbi Yitzchak wanted to teach you that in his opinion, Shmuel was right, and for Shkolim you read Kitisa, and therefore you need a third Sefer Torah. The second one is turned to Pinchas for Rosh Chodesh, and the third one is turned to Kisisa for Shkolim. So V'lei Maho. So then he should have taught us what you do when Rosh Chodesh other falls on Shabbat, and you have 3 Torot, one for Parshas HaShavua, one for Rosh Chodesh, and one for Shkolim. V'lo Bayahach. He wouldn't have needed to tell me that when Rosh Chodesh Tevet falls on Shabbat, you need 3 Sifrei Torah. The Gemara says, you got me there, you're right. Chada miklal chaverta itmer. Rabbi Yitzchak never did say it twice. We figured out one from the other. Once Rabbi Yitzchak taught us that Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, you need 3 Sifrei Torah. You need one for Parshas HaShavua. You need one for Rosh Chodesh, and one you need for Shkolim. So now I know that you take out 3 Sifrei Torah. What follows is, and we figured out on our own, that when Rosh Chodesh Tevet falls on Shabbat, which is middle of Chanukah, you again will need 3 Sifrei Torah, one for Parshas HaShavua, one for Rosh Chodesh, and one for Chanukah. He never did bother saying it twice, but we were geniuses, so we figured out what to do when Rosh Chodesh Tevet fell on Shabbat, because he taught us what you do when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat. Now we start another topic, similar. On regular Chanukah, you remember when we davened together on Chanukah, how do you read Itmer? It was said, Rosh Chodesh Tevet Shechaliyot B'chol. As I told you, Chanukah starts on the 25th of Kislev. Since it's 8 days, it is inevitable that Rosh Chodesh Tevet will be during Chanukah. But let's say it's not Shabbat. Let's say Rosh Chodesh Tevet falls out, of course, during Chanukah, during the week. So you need 2 Sifrei Torah. One Sefer Torah to read for Rosh Chodesh, one Sefer Torah to read for Chanukah. But how do we do it? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Karu Talata b'Rosh Chodesh, you call up 3 aliyot in Pinchas for Rosh Chodesh, V'chad, and then the 4th aliyah, you read B'Chanukah. You read Parshas Naso, you read a piece for Chanukah. Rav Dimi de Min Chaifa, Rav Dimi from the city of Haifa, Amar says, Karu, you read Talata, 3 aliyot B'Chanukah, 3 aliyot in Parshas Naso, which relates to Chanukah, V'chad, and the 4th aliyah will read Rosh Chodesh, will read from Pinchas and Rosh Chodesh. So basically, it's 3 and 1, but the dispute is 3 in what and 1 in which other. Is it 3 in Pinchas, Rosh Chodesh, and 1 in Chanukah, or is it 3 in Chanukah and 1 in Rosh Chodesh? Amar Rav Mani said, Kivotei, according to the Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha's view, Mistavra is more logical, because since the Tadir, what's more frequent, V'she'eno Tadir, and what's less frequent, Tadir Kodim, what's more frequent has priority. So Rosh Chodesh has more priority than Chanukah, and therefore Rosh Chodesh should get the 3 aliyot, and Chanukah should get 1. On the other hand, Amar Rab Avin says, no, Kivotei, according to the Rav Dimi, Mistavra is more logical. Mi Goram L'Revi Sheyavo, who caused it that we have a 4th aliyah? Had it just been Chanukah, we only would have had 3 aliyot. Why do we have a 4th aliyah? Because it's Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh requires 4. Hilkach, therefore, Revi b'Rosh Chodesh boi mikri. Therefore, the 4th aliyah should be Rosh Chodesh. We should have 3 aliyahs for Chanukah, like we have every day of Chanukah. And now that it's Rosh Chodesh and we need a 4th aliyah, give the 4th aliyah to read b'Rosh Chodashim. So my Havi Allah. So what's the bottom line? I know it's 3 and 1, but is it 3 Chanukah, 1 Rosh Chodesh, or 3 Rosh Chodesh, 1 Chanukah? Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says, Ein mashgichen b'Rosh Chodesh. We don't pay attention to Rosh Chodesh. In other words, we don't pay attention at all. But it's 3 Chanukah, 1 Rosh Chodesh. Rabba Amar, Rabba says, Ein mashgichen b'Chanukah. We don't pay attention to Chanukah. In other words, 3 Rosh Chodesh, 1 Chanukah. The law is, Ein mashgichim b'Chanukah. We don't pay attention to Chanukah. What does that mean? Rosh Chodesh Ikar. The main reading will be Rosh Chodesh, 3 Aliyah Rosh Chodesh, and 1 Aliyah Chanukah. And that's the end of that. I hope that at the beginning of this year you were able to follow. I'm going to repeat again because it's relevant to the next piece. We have come to the decision, finally, that Shkolim was Kitisa. Okay, the beginning of Kitisa talks about Shkolim. Now the parsha before Kitisa is Tetzaveh. The parsha after Kitisa is Vayakel. Okay, everybody clear? The parsha before Kitisa is Tetzaveh. The parsha after Kitisa is Vayakel. So here we go. Itmer, it was said, Chal liot bevata Tetzaveh. Let's say Parshas HaShavua is Tetzaveh, and now for Shkolim you need to read the beginning of Kitisa, which is the next parsha. How do you do it? Amar Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, Rav Yitzchak Nafcha says, Karu Shita bevata Tetzaveh ad Kitisa. Make 6 aliyot to go through the whole parsha of Tetzaveh from beginning to the end. 6 aliyot. Shabbat you need a 7th aliyah, no problem. The 7th aliyah, will read Mikitisa ad Vosita. The 7th aliyah will be from the beginning of Kitisa until Vosita, which is actually the parsha of Shkolim, and that's how you do it, simple enough. The parsha HaShavua was Tetzaveh, so give it the 6 aliyah. Again, in those days, the maftir did not get an extra aliyah. The maftir was the 7th aliyah. So now, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka says, since Parshas HaShavua is Tetzaveh, good for you. So give 6 aliyah Tetzaveh. And the 7th aliyah is supposed to be Shkolim, so good. That's where we're up to. After Tetzaveh comes Kitisa. Kitisa Shkolim, so give him the 7th aliyah Kitisa. Amr Abai says, I'm not happy with that. I'll tell you why. Amri, because people will say, Ukumi hu de kamukmi hatan. You happen to be up to there. Let me explain what he means. You see, the reason we read Kitisa and Shkolim is to remind the people that it's Parsha Shkolim, that they should give Shkolim. But, so if you're reading some other Parshas HaShavua, and then all of a sudden you read Kitisa, everybody's going to wonder, hey, why did we jump to Kitisa? Because Kitisa Shkolim, because it's Parsha Shkolim. But if Parshas HaShavua was Tetzaveh, and there's a big Sefer Torah, people didn't even have Chumoshim in those days. So there's a big Sefer Torah, you had 6 aliyahs that read Tetzaveh, and for the 7th aliyah you continued into Kitisa. So people will not realize that you're reading it for Shkolim. People will think you're just reading a little more. You just continued from Tetzaveh into Kitisa. And it's not evident that you're reading it for Shkolim. You're just continuing your reading. So what's Abai's solution? Elamar Abai, I'll tell you. Karu Shita, you should make 6 aliyahs to read Mi Va'ata Tetzaveh ad Vosita. 6 aliyahs should read the whole parsha from Tetzaveh, from beginning to the end, and continue into Kitisa, until the end of what we normally read for Shkolim, until Vosita Kir Nechoshes. And V'chad, the 7th aliyah Tani, should repeat V'kori and read over again Mikitisa ad Vosita. Should read over again from Kisita until Vosita. So people will wonder, hey, how come you're reading that over again? Evidently, it must be Parsha Shkolim. So again, Abayi's solution is start your Parshas HaShavua from the beginning of your Parshas HaShavua. It is Tetzaveh. Read 6 aliyot all the way through the whole Parshas Tetzaveh and into Kitisa. Read the piece that normally you read for Shkolim, and then when you'll read it again for the 7th aliyah, everybody will realize you're doing it for Shkolim. So Meitivei, the Gemara responds now with a question. We learned the Braita, Chal Liot, if Parsha Shkolim happens to be the Parsha HaSmuchala. If Shkolim happens to be in the Parsha which is next to Shkolim, either Bein Milfaneha, let's say Shkolim happens to be Parshas Tetzaveh, which is before Kitisa, or Bein Milachreha, or Shkolim happens to be in Vayakel, which is after Kitisa. Korinota v'koflinota. You'll read the Parsha of Shkolim and repeat it. You'll do it twice. One more time. What the Braita says, but I'm not explaining. What does it say? If Parsha Shkolim will happen to be when Parshas HaShavua is Tetzaveh, or Parsha Shkolim will happen to be when Parshas HaShavua is Vayakel, Parsha Shkolim will be done and repeated. And we know that Shkolim is in Kitisa, which is in the middle. Anyway. So Bishlam, it's well understood La Abai, according to Abai and Nicha. It makes sense. Shkolim happened to be Tetzaveh, and what was Abai's proposal, have 6 aliyot to read the whole tetzaveh into kitisa until you get to vasita, and then for the 7th aliyah, repeat it again. So what did Abaye say? One more time. Have 6 aliyot from the beginning of tetzaveh until the end of tetzaveh, and continue into Parshas Kitisa until Vasita, and the 7th aliyah do that Parsha of Shkolim again. That's exactly what the Brisa said, to do it a second time. Eller Yitzchak Nafcha Kasha. But according to Yitzchak Nafcha, it's difficult. What was his solution? He said, have 6 aliyot to do Tetzaveh from the beginning to the end of Tetzaveh, and the 7th aliyah will do Kitisa. So where's the doubling? You're just doing it once. Amar lach Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, so Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha responds to you, Ula Abaye, and according to Abaye, Minicha, is the Braita understood? Tainach, it's well understood Lefaneha. Yes, Abaye is a real hero. He certainly explained very nicely what the Braita meant when Shkolim was Parshas Tetzaveh. And again, how did Abaye explain it? And how did Abaye understand the Braita? That if Shkolim is Tetzaveh, you had 6 aliyot from the beginning of Tetzaveh into the end of Tetzaveh and continue into Kitisa until Vasita, and the 7th aliyah reads that parsha from Kitisa until Vasita again. Beautiful. But but the Brisa also talked about what happened if Shkolim is Vayakel. No, so how do you explain it now? If Shkolim falls on Parshas Hashavua Vayakel, so what are you going to do? I guess for Parshas Hashavua you'll read Vayakel, and for Shkolim you'll go back and read from the beginning of Kitisa till Va'asita. So that's what you do when Shkolim falls on Vayakel. So how do you explain the word kofla? How do you explain the word doubling? B'Shabbatot. It doesn't mean you do it twice. It means you do it 2 weeks in a row. If Shkolim falls on Parshas Vayakel, what was last week? Kitisa. So you read Kitisa last week for Parshas Hashavua once. The next week when it's Vayakel and it's Shkolim, you'll read Vayakel and you'll read the first part of Kitisa a second time. So Koflin means that piece of Kitisa is going to be read 2 weeks in a row. 1 week you'll read Kitisa because it's Parshas Hashavua, and the following week when Parshas Hashavua is Vayakel, you'll read that piece from the beginning of Kitisa till Vasita because now it's Shkolim. So Hachanami Kofla b'Shabbatot. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says the same thing will be if Shkolim falls on Parshas Tetzaveh. So my opinion, says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, is that you have 6 aliyot reading from the beginning of Tetzaveh until the end of Tetzaveh. The 7th aliyah will be to read Kitisa, and doubling means because next week, which is the week after Tetzaveh, will be Kitisa, you'll be reading Kitisa again, a second Shabbat in a row. The Braita never meant, as Abaye understood, to read it twice that same Shabbat. It didn't mean what Abaye said, that when Shkolim falls in Tetzaveh, you should read from the beginning of Tetzaveh to the end of Tetzaveh and into Kitisa until Va'asita, and then read it again a second time because it's going to be given for the 7th aliyah for Shkolim. No, it means you do it 2 Shabbatot in a row. If Shkolim, again I'm repeating, if Shkolim falls to Tzaveh, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, I'm right, could be. You'll do from the beginning of Tetzaveh to the end of Tetzaveh 6 aliyot, and the 7th aliyah will be Kitisa. So what's the meaning of doubling? Doubling means that next Shabbat you'll be reading Kitisa because it's Parshas HaShavua. The same thing that happens if Parshas Shkolim is Vayakel, the Shabbat after Kitisa. First week you'll be reading Kitisa for Parshas HaShavua, and the next week you'll be reading Kitisa because it's Shkolim. Another issue. Chaliyot bekitisa. What happens if Shkolim happens to fall on Parshas Kitisa, Atzma itself? Amr Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Karu Shita Miva Asita. You start 6 aliyot, and 6 aliyot should start from Vasita. Don't read the beginning of Kitisa. Skip it. Start from Vasita. Vasita Kir Nechoshet. Start from there. Ad until the end of Kitisa, until Vayakel. V'chad Kari, and then the 7th aliyah should now read the beginning of Kitisa, which is Shkolim. Mikitisa ad Vasita. From the beginning of Kitisa until Vasita. Maskef labayas, abaya tax Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, hashta amri, they'll say lemafreu dekari. They say then you're reading it backwards. First you read the second part of Parshas Kitisa, then you read the first part. Elam Abayas says Karu Shita Ad Vayakel. Have 6 people read from the beginning of Kitisa until the end. Do the entire Parshas Hashavua. Vechad, and then the 7th Aliyah, the one person Tani V'Kari will read over again the beginning of Kitisa, Mikitisa Ad Vasita, and everybody will say, why are you reading it again? Because it's Shkolim. Tanya, we learned the Braita, Kavate Dabai, which corresponds to Abaya, Chalil B'Kitisa Atzma, if Shkolim falls on Kitisa itself, Korin Ota V'Koflin Ota. You'll read it and repeat it. You'll read the whole Parshas Kitisa, and then you'll repeat again from the beginning of Kitisa till Vasita for Shkolim. So first let me review what we learned today, and then I'll English it. The first thing we learned was a finale. Yesterday we had a dispute between Rav and Shmuel what to read for Shkolim. According to Rav, you read the Parshas Atamid from Pinchas, and according to Shmuel, you read Kitisa, which was about Shkolim. There is a Braita which tells us what to do if Shkolim happen to fall in the Parsha before or the Parsha of after what we normally read for Shkolim. One more time, there's a Braita that tells us what to do if Parshas HaShavua happens to fall in the Parsha before or the Parsha after what we normally read for Shkolim. How do you deal with that? So the Gemara explained, if we say Shkolim is Kitisa, like Shmuel's opinion, it is reasonable that Shkolim can happen either in the Parsha before, which is Tetzaveh, or the Parsha after, which is Vayakel, because those Parshas usually fall around the time of Parsha Shkolim, a little bit before Purim time. But according to Rav, if the Parsha Shkolim is Pinchas, Pinchas never falls before Pesach. Pinchas usually falls during the summer. So how could there be a brisa that discusses what happens if Shkolim falls on the Parsha before or after what you normally read for Shkolim? What you normally read for Shkolim, according to Rav, is Talmud. And Talmud is in Pinchas, which is summertime. So the Gemara answered, well, in Israel, where they read the Torah once every 3 years, it was possible that Pinchas would actually fall sometime before Purim, because it's not like our 1 year cycle for Torah. In the end, the Gemara's conclusion was that Shmuel was right, and that's what you and I and all of us do. That if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, and that is Shkolim, for Shkolim you read Kitisa, not Parshas Atamid. And the Haftorah is from Navi, from Yehoyada Kohen, where he too collected Shkolim to repair the Mikdash. So let me English that piece. If you go back to, again, where we started from this morning, halfway down the wide lines on Chavtet Amid Bet, Meitivei. Meitivei, the Gemara responds with a question. Chal, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls, liot to be, in the Parsha, I'm just going to English it, in the Parsha that's close to what we read for Shkolim, whether it's the Parsha before what we read for Shkolim, or whether it's Mil Achreha, the Parsha that's after what we read for Shkolim, you will read it 1 week, and you'll double it again. Bishlama, it's well understood according to the one who says, according to Shmuel, who says that Shkolim is Kitisa, Hainu Dimitrami, that's how it can happen at that time. The Parshas of Tetzaveh or Vayakel fall before Purim. But according to the Manda Amar, according to Rav, who says that it's Tzaves Karbani, which is Pinchas, Mi Mitrami, does it happen at that time? Does Pinchas happen before Purim? And the Gemara answers yes. For the people of the West, Marava in Israel, the Maski who complete the Torah in a period of 3 years, it's possible that Pinchas will be before Purim. We learned in a Braita, which corresponds to Shmuel, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, which is Shkolim, we read Kitisa, as Shmuel said, and the Haftorah is Yehoyada HaKohen. Let me review first outside and then inside English what the next piece was. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha said that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, so we have 3 things to read. We have Parshas HaShavua, we have to read about Rosh Chodesh, and we have to read Shkolim. So you take out 3 Torah, and the first one you read the topic of the day, which is Parshas HaShavua, and the next Torah you read Pinchas, which is Rosh Chodesh, and the third Torah we read Kitisa for Shkolim. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said a parallel law, if middle of Chanukah, which has a Rosh Chodesh Tevet, if it falls on Shabbat, so again you take out 3 Torah. In Torah number 1, you read Parshas HaShavua. In Torah number 2, you read Pinchas for Rosh Chodesh. And Torah number 3, you read Naso for Chanukah. But Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha needed to tell me both of these rules. Because if he only would have talked about Rosh Chodesh Tevet falling on Shabbat when it's Chanukah, I would say, okay, there you need 3 Sifrei Torah. But if Rosh Chodesh Adar fell on Shabbat, if Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha would have held like Rav, that Shkolim is as Karbani Lachmi, which is in Pinchas, then you'd only need 2 Sifrei Torah. You'd need the first one for Parshas HaShavua, and the second one would be both for Rosh Chodesh and for Shkolim, because both of them would be Pinchas. So that's why he needed to tell us that you need 3 Sifrei Torah, because Rosh Chodesh is Pinchas, but Shkolim is Kitisa. So then he should have just taught me what you do when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, and he wouldn't have had to tell me what to do when Rosh Chodesh Tevet falls on Shabbat. The Gemara says, you're right. He only did tell us what to do when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, that you have 1 Torah for Parshas HaShavua, a 2nd Torah for Rosh Chodesh, and a 3rd Torah for Shkolim, and we, of course, figured out what to do when Rosh Chodesh Tevet during Chanukah also falls on Shabbat. Now let's English it. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls to be on Shabbat, you take out 3 Torah and you read in them. In one you read the topic of the day, which is Parshas HaShavua. And in one you read of Rosh Chodesh, which is Pinchas. And in one you read Kitisa for Shkolim. Similarly, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which is during Chanukah, that fell to be on Shabbat. Again, you bring out from the Aron Kodesh 3 Torah and you read in them. In one you read the topic of the day, which is Parshat HaShavua. In one you read Rosh Chodesh, which is Pinchas. And in one you read Chanukah, which is Naso. And you needed them both. If he would have said Baha, if he only would have talked about the case of Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which is Chanukah, in this case, Rabbi Yitzchak said you needed 3. But in this case, in the case of Rosh Chodesh Adar falling on Shabbat, maybe he would hold like Rav, who says that Shkolim is Karbani Lachmi, is Pinchas, and then 2 Torah would be enough. And 2 Torah would be enough. So Kamash Malon, so Rabbi Yitzchak teaches us that for Shkolim you actually need 3 Torah. You need 1 for Parshas HaShavua, 1 for Pinchas for Rosh Chodesh, and 1 for Kitisa for Shkolim. But Velema, he should have said he should have said the one of Rosh Chodesh Adar, it wouldn't have needed the other. Below Bayahach, the answer is Chadot 1, Michlal Chaverta, is implied from the other, Itmer it was said. He really only taught us what to do on Shkolim, but because he taught us what to do on Shkolim, that helped us understand what to do for Teveh during Chanukah. Let me review the next issue. Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which is during Chanukah, falls during the week. So you have to read about Rosh Chodesh, you have to read about Chanukah. So there was a dispute between Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha and Rav Dimi from Haifa. You'd had to read 3 in one Sefer and 1 in the other. So one opinion was 3 Rosh Chodesh, 1 Chanukah, and one opinion was 3 Chanukah, 1 Rosh Chodesh. On one hand, it was logical to do 3 Rosh Chodesh and 1 Chanukah, because Rosh Chodesh is more frequent than Chanukah. On the other hand, it might have been more logical to do 3 Chanukah and 1 Rosh Chodesh, because every day of Chanukah you have 3 Aliyot. The only reason you have a 4th Aliyah is because it's Rosh Chodesh. So let's give the 4th Aliyah in Rosh Chodesh. And the halacha is, what's the rule? Well, there was a dispute what the rule was, but the bottom line is we make Rosh Chodesh the main. We have 3 Aliyot in Rosh Chodesh and 1 Aliyah Chanukah. Let's English it. Itmer it was said, Rosh Chodesh Tevet, it falls during the week. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said to read 3 Aliyot Rosh Chodesh and 1 Chanukah. Rav Dimi from Haifa said to read 3 Aliyot Chanukah and 1 Rosh Chodesh. Rav Mani said Kivatei, according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, is more logical, because what's frequent and what's less frequent, what's more frequent comes first. Rav Oven said that Rav Dimi is more logical, because what causes the 4th aliyah to come, Rosh Chodesh. Therefore, give the fourth aliyah Rosh Chodesh. Have 3 aliyot Chanukah, and the fourth aliyah, which is because of Rosh Chodesh, give him Rosh Chodesh. My Havi Allah, what is the bottom line? Rav Yosef says that we disregard Rosh Chodesh. In other words, we do 3 Chanukah, 1 Rosh Chodesh. Rabbah says we disregard Chanukah. We do 3 Rosh Chodesh, 1 Chanukah. And the law is we disregard Chanukah, and Rosh Chodesh is the main. 3 Rosh Chodesh and 1 Chanukah. Let me explain review the next piece, and then we'll English it. What happens if Shkolim falls into Parshas Tetzaveh, and Tetzaveh is the Parsha before Kitisa? What do? So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, have 6 aliyot to do Tetzaveh, and then the 7th aliyah will do from the beginning of Kitisa until Vasita, which is Shkolim. Abaye says it's not going to be evident that it's Shkolim, because since you finished Tetzaveh, people will say that you were simply continuing reading the Torah, and you continued into Kitisa for some reason, but it was just a continuation. You didn't read it for the purpose of Shkolim. So Abaye's suggestion is have 6 aliyot read from the beginning of Tetzaveh into Kitisa until Vasita, and then somebody should read over again from the beginning of Kitisa till Vasita, and people will see the reason you're reading it over again must be because it's Shkolim. The Gemara asks a kasha against Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. This is the brisa that we just had before. If Shkolim falls in the parsha before, which is Tetzaveh, or the parsha after, which is Vayakel, you read and repeat. According to Abaya, when Shkolim fell on Tetzaveh, you read from the beginning of Tetzaveh into Kitisa, and then the 7th aliyah repeated from the beginning of Kitisa to Vasita. That's repeat. But according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, he said 6 aliyot read from the beginning of Tetzaveh to end of Tetzaveh, and the 7th one just continues Kitisa. So where's the repeat? So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, and according to Abaya, I will ask you how to explain the Braita. The Braita talks about if Parsha Shkolim is the Shabbat after Kitisa, it's Vayakel. So what is the meaning of read and repeat? Where's the repeat? If Shkolim is Parshat Vayakel, where's the repeat? What are you going to do? You're going to read Vayakel, and then you'll read from the beginning of Kitisa to Vasita. Where's the repeat? The answer is you're repeating it 2 weeks in a row. Last week you read Kitisa because it was Parshas HaShavua, and this week Vayakel, you're reading Vayakel, and you're rereading a piece of Kitisa for Shkolim. So according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, the previous week will also be the same thing. You will read Tetzaveh until the end of Tetzaveh, and then you'll read Kitisa for Shkolim, and the following week, when it is Parshas Kitisa, you'll repeat it a second time. Let's read that inside. It was said, if Shkolim falls in Tetzaveh, which is the Shabbat, which is the Parsha before Kitisa, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, have 6 aliyot that read all of Tetzaveh until Kitisa, and the 7th aliyah should read Kitisa until Vasita. So Abaya says, Amri, people will say, Ukumi hu dukamuk mihatam. That's where you were up to. You just kept reading. So rather, Abaya says, have 6 aliyot to read all of Tetzaveh into Kitisa until Vasita, and then the 7th aliyah, 1, should Tani V'Kari read over again from Kitisa until Vasita. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, so the Gemara responds with a question. The Braita says if Shkolim falls in the parsha which is next to what we read for Shkolim, whether it's before, which is Tetzaveh, or whether it's after, it's Vayakel, you read and repeat. So Bishlam, it's well understood according to Abaya, you read and repeat, because Abaya said you read from the beginning of Tetzaveh and into Kitisa until Vasita, and the 7th aliyah repeats it. But according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, it's difficult, because according to him, the first aliyah read from beginning of Tetzaveh to the end of the first 6 people read from beginning of Tetzaveh to the end of Tetzaveh, and the 7th one just read from Kitisa till Vasita, just 1 aliyah. Where's the repeat? So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, and according to Abaya, is the brisa good, minicha? Tainach, it's well understood what happens if it falls in Tetzaveh the Shabbat before Kitisa. But la'achrea, if it falls the Shabbat after Kitisa, in Vayakel, heichi mishkachas la, how do you find doubling or rereading it? Where do you reread it? If it falls Vayakel, you read Vayakel, and then for Maftir, you're going to read Kitisa. But where's the repeat? Rather, my itlach lememer, how do you understand to repeat? You repeat it kofla b'shabbatot. You're repeating it 2 Shabbatot in a row. The first Shabbat you read Kitisa because it was Parshas HaShavua, and the following Shabbat, which was Vayakel, you read Vayakel, and then you read a piece of Kitisa for Shkolim. So Hochanami here also says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, when Shkolim fell in Tetzaveh, you read Tetzaveh, and then the seventh Aliyah was Kitisa for Shkolim, and next week, when it's Parshas Kitisa, Kofla b'Shabbatot, you'll be reading Kitisa again. The last piece, what happens if Shkolim falls on Kitisa? Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, don't start from the beginning of Kitisa, start from V'asita, have 6 aliyahs from V'asita till the end, and the 7th aliyah should read from the beginning of the parsha until V'asita, which is the parsha of Shkolim. So Abai says, but that's backwards. You're reading the second part of Kitisa before you read the first part. So Abai says, have 6 aliyot read from the beginning of Kitisa all the way till the end, till Vayakel. And the 7th aliyah should read the first part of Kitisa again, which is Shkolim, and everybody will see that it's Shkolim. And the Braita says exactly what Abaya said. Again, Chal, if Shkolim falls to be on Kitisa itself, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, have 6 aliyot read, Karushita, 6 aliyot should read from V'asita Kir Nechoshet, which is in the middle of Parshas Kitisa, until the end of the Parsha, until Vayakel. And the 7th aliyah, which is Shkolim, should read from the beginning of Kitisa until V'asita. Abai attacks. So now people will say, you're reading backwards, you're reading the second part of Kitisa before the first part. So Abai says, have 6 aliyot read the whole Parsha Kitisa until Vayakel, and then the 7th aliyah should reread from the beginning of Kitisa until Vasita, and everybody will realize that you're rereading because it's Shkolim. We learned a brisa that corresponds to Abaye. If Shkolim falls on Kitisa, you read it and then you repeat it. First you read from the beginning to the end for Parshas HaShavua, and then you reread again from the beginning of Kitisa till Vasita for Shkolim. Okay, today the Gemara took a bit longer. It was a trifle more complex. Maybe we'll do just a little bit of Haggada, just a little bit. Again, if anybody has questions, feel free to email me or call me, and I'll help you understand it. It might help you also if you actually take a chumash, if you have, and take a look at those 3 parshiot, Tetzaveh, Kitisa, and Vayakel. So you'll see how Tetzaveh comes before Kitisa. You'll see what is Shkolim from the beginning of Kitisa until Dabrel B'nai Yisrael B'marta Vasisa Kir Nechoshet, and you'll see Vayakel comes after. I believe we were up to Baruch Shomer Haftachasa Yisrael, when Hashem said to Avraham Avinu at the Brisbane Absorim that the Jews would be in exile for 400 years, and afterwards He would take them out and He would punish the nation that harms them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chishav Esaketz, God calculated the end, and to do what He said to Avraham Avinu at the Brit, at the covenant between the pieces, He said to Avram, you should know your children will be strangers in a land that's not theirs, and they will be enslaved, they will suffer for 400 years. The nation that they serve, I will judge them, and then they'll go out with great wealth. You know that instead of being in Egypt for 400 years, we were there only for 210 years, which means that we were there for 190 years less than we were supposed to. Those 190 years is the gematria of Kates. Kuf is 100 and Tzadi is 90. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chishav Esa Kuf Tzadi, God calculated the 190 and deducted it from the 400 so that we would only have to be in Mitzrayim for 210 years. But how did God deduct it? And the answer is because Hashem told Avram, your children will be strangers in a land that's not theirs. When Yitzchak was born, Yitzchak was a stranger in a land that was not his, because we did not own Eretz Canaan. So from when Yitzchak was born until he had Yaakov was 60 years, and from when Yaakov was born until Yaakov arrived in Mitzrayim, Yaakov was 130 years. Those 190 years count. So those 190 years were part of Ger Yeh Zaracha, your children will be strangers in a land that's not theirs. And then for 210 years, we spent in Mitzrayim. There's another interesting explanation, again, if you want to hold tight for some numbers. that really we should have been in Mitzrayim for 400 years, but the labor was so intensive that because they embittered our lives so badly and made it so harsh that 210 years were equivalent to 400 because of the bitterness. In the Chumash, the words they embittered the Jews' lives is Vaymaru et Chayehem, and they embittered their lives. And the ta'amim on Vaymaru et Chayehem are Kadma va'azla. In Aramaic, the words Kadma va'azla mean to hurry up and go. So the Gra, Rabbi Eliyahu from Vilna, says that we were able to hurry up and go before the 400 years because of Vaymaru et Chayehem. Their lives were embittered, and therefore we were able to Kadma va'azla. We could advance and go out earlier. Also, what's interesting is the word Kadma, you can calculate it, Kuf Dalid Mem Aleph is Begematria 145. Ve'azla, Vav Aleph Zayin, Lamed Aleph is Begematria 45. So how interesting that Kadma va'azla equals 190. So we Kadma va'azla, we hurried up and went earlier by 190 years. It is also interesting, if you like numbers, that Lachma Anya, the bread of poverty, Lachma Lamed Ches Mem Aleph is Begematria 79, and Anya Ayin Nun Yud Aleph is Begematria 131. 79 and 131 is 210. So for 210 years we ate Lachma Anya, the bread of poverty, when we were enslaved in Egypt. There is, however, another issue that there is a pasuk in Parshas Bo that says that the total time that the Jews were in exile or slavery was 430 years. So that's already difficult. I explained that 400 was from when Yitzchok was born, but how do we explain 430? When Yitzchok was born, Avram Avinu was 100. But 30 years before that is when Avram Avinu had his bris bein absorim. So therefore it's 430 years from Avram Avinu's covenant between the pieces. 430 from when he had the covenant, 400 from when Yitzchok was born, 210 years from when Yaakov arrived in Mitzrayim. But why in the world should we count the 430 years from when he had the bris bein absorim? I mean, what happened then? The answer is that when Avram heard that his children would be enslaved in Egypt, he sorrowed over it. He mourned over it. It troubled him very badly. In fact, the Torah says that when he had this covenant between the pieces, Ema chashecha gedola nafelet alav, a very deep and heavy darkness fell upon him. A tremendous sadness fell upon him. That sadness that Avram felt when he had the bris bein absorim, when he was 70, from there, the worry that he had till he was 100 and had Yitzchak, that also counts. And there's an interesting proof to this. The halacha is that if somebody kills unintentionally, that he has to go to a city of refuge and stay there until the Kohen Gadol dies. What happens if he's convicted of having killed somebody unintentionally, but he never had a chance to go to the city of refuge and the Kohen Gadol dies? He also is absolved. He's freed from having to go. But the question is, if he already went to the city of refuge, he already went to exile, so he already suffered some of his punishment. Now when the Kohen Gadol dies, he's welcome to go free. But if he's never gone yet, why should the Kohen Gadol's death free him from having to go? He never even suffered. The answer is once he's convicted and in his mind he worries about having to go, that in itself is already considered a punishment. So therefore here too, when Avram Avinu was told at 70 years old that his children will be enslaved, that in itself was punishment and suffering for him for the next 30 years, knowing that they're going to have to go. Another explanation for the 430 years, again if you like numbers, is that the hardest and bitterest labor was the last 86 years that the Jews were in Egypt. In fact, Miriam was 86 years old when they left Egypt, and the word Miriam comes from the word Mar. When she was born, they named her Miriam from Mar, because that's when the bitterest labor began. You know that the amount of Jews between 20 and 60 who exited from Egypt was 600,000, and that's considered the standard number of Jews. But it says that the Jews that left Egypt were only 20%, only a fifth, which means that 4/5, 80% died before they left Egypt during the Makkah of Choshech, which means that not 600,000 worked, but 5 times 600,000 worked. So if you have 5 times as many laborers, it makes sense to only have to work a fifth of the time. Again, if they were supposed to work 430 years, but they had 5 times the amount of laborers, especially because the mothers were giving birth to 6 at a time. So therefore, now that they had 5 times as many laborers as they should have had, therefore the hard labor was only a sixth of the time. So a sixth of 400, a fifth. I'm sorry, a fifth of the, 1/5 came out, another 4/5 died. So 5 times 86 is 430. So therefore, 86 years of 5 times the people working is equal to 430 years of a regular amount of people working. It is interesting that the word kos is begematria 86, kaf, vav, and samach. And the 4 kosot and the kos shel Eliyahu is 5 times 86 equals to 430. And I'm going to stop here.